As a former police officer, I've encountered my fair share of unsettling cases over the span of 3 decades on the force. However, there's one night in particular that remains burned into my mind. It was during the graveyard shift. My partner Detective Kelly and I received a call about a potential domestic dispute and loud disturbance at a residential address on the outskirts of town. As we approached the location, the rain lashed the windshield, and the distant rumble of thunder added to the ominous aura that would accompany us throughout the night. The caller had mentioned an apparent argument that had been going on for hours, and as we drew near, the voices of the quarrelling couple seeped through the thin walls of their house. We parked up and stepped out into the pelting rain, the sound of their escalating screams becoming ever more discernible. Approaching the front door, we exchanged grave looks. In our line of work, you learn how volatile situations can escalate quickly, and this one seemed particularly fiery. Kelly knocked on the door, announcing our presence as protocol dictated, but instead of the expected commotion, silence descended like a shroud. We knocked again, louder this time, with no response. The hush was disconcerting. After a few moments, the door creaked open slightly, revealing a young woman's face, bathed in the dim glow of the hallway. Her pupils were dilated, her speech slurred, her state a clear cocktail of alcohol and/or drugs. "Okay, we'll quiet down," she mumbled. Her vacant eyes barely focused on us. Our instincts were on high alert. Such calls often revealed hidden dangers, and while Kelly kept a watchful eye on the woman, I noticed a large hunting knife on the counter behind her. The mere sight of it was enough to make my hand inch towards my holstered firearm. We entered the property and restrained the dishevelled couple until we could work out what was going on. I started to survey the scene while my partner watched the 2 suspects in the kitchen. The house was a wreck, furniture toppled, walls scrawled with marks and manic scratches, and the unmistakable sour stench of methamphetamine hung in the air. I noticed a slightly open door leading to the basement stairs, which I knew I had to clear for anyone else that might be hiding in the house. I descended, the dim light bulb barely illuminating the steep stairs. I turned on my flashlight for a better view, and the sight that met my eyes has haunted me since. There was blood everywhere, seeping into the cracks of the old basement floor, pooling beneath the shelves and amongst all the junk. I swiftly called for backup, notifying Detective Kelly of my discovery. With thick tension in my chest, I retraced my steps to ascend the stairs and await the arrival of additional officers. As I reached the top, my partner was in the midst of a heated exchange with the troubled couple, adding to the chaos. My heart sank as I went to close the basement door, and my eyes fell upon a large plastic tub, adorned with streaks of drying blood. What lay within sent me into a paroxysm of horror. As I squinted my eyes at the tub, the contents became more clear. I could see that the streaks were actually blood-matted hair, attached to what looked to be a severed human head, and other body parts. I fled the house, seeking the instant relief of fresh, rain-laden air. Detective Kelly and I removed the 2 suspects from the property as backup officers arrived and the scene was secured and searched thoroughly. We discovered the remains of 3 individuals within that house. Their lives ended in unimaginable horror, but it didn't end there. In the kitchen, beneath layers of tainted linoleum, we unearthed a hoard of methamphetamine, revealing the full scope of the situation and motivation for the atrocities that had unfolded in the blood-soaked house. It was, without a doubt, the most gruesome incident I'd ever encountered during my time on the force. It all escalated so fast and happened within a few minutes, and I dread to think what else could have followed if my partner and I had not entered the property that night. I spent 30 years working for the Midlands Police in England. I've had enough grim encounters to make me slightly cynical about human nature, but one case still makes my blood run cold when I think about it. We'd been conducting surveillance on the suspected stash house for weeks, and all signs pointed it to being a hub for drug activities. Vehicles which were known to us came and went at all hours, which was not typical for this quiet part of the neighbourhood. We had enough reasonable suspicion to plan a raid on the property, and at around 4 a.m. we gathered our team and prepared for the operation. The tension in the air was palpable as we approached the house. With a swift yet cautious entry, we stormed the property, fully expecting to find a stockpile of drugs and/or potentially armed individuals. However, what we discovered was perhaps more unsettling. Inside the house, the rooms were mostly empty. The anticipated drugs were nowhere to be found. It was like the place had been scrubbed clean of any incriminating evidence, and the surging adrenaline gave way to confusion. As we searched through the rooms, trying to make sense of the situation, we began to hear a muffled thudding sound. We followed the sound and it led us back to the small room at the rear of the house, which we had already cleared. Looking closely at one end of the room, we noticed there was a false wall which had been cleverly concealed by shelves. As we tore down the shelves and exposed what lay behind, our stomachs churned with a mix of dread and disbelief. Inside the hidden room, in the dark, were 16 people gagged and bound with zip ties. Their eyes were filled with terror, and their faces had the pallor of prolonged fear. It was clear that we had stumbled upon a human trafficking operation, not a drug stash house, as we had originally thought. We quickly called for medics, and the victims were taken to the hospital for immediate care. It was truly a heartbreaking sight to see people who'd been subjected to such unimaginable cruelty, the trauma visible on their faces. Possibly even more heartbreaking than the rescue itself was the victims' reluctance to testify or identify their captors. They were paralysed by fear, unable or unwilling to provide us with any information we needed, which unfortunately can be typical in these kind of situations. Fortunately, the evidence we had been gathering in our surveillance was enough to link certain known individuals to the premises and make arrests. The individuals we could charge were held and brought to court. It was a lengthy legal battle, but the weight of the evidence against them was undeniable, and they each received lengthy sentences, as well as several of their accomplices. Although our rescue of those 16 souls was a victory, the emotional scars are heavy. It's a case that stayed with me long after my days in the force, and I'm hoping that talking about it will help the scars to heal. My time as a homicide detective in the Sunshine State often felt like a relentless descent into the shadows of human depravity. But one case from my time working in a special task force alongside the gang unit still lingers in my memory, a chilling one that I've never shared until now. The case had escalated with a tip from a confidential informant. Multiple missing persons were suspected to be linked to an ongoing gang dispute over street corners, and our source claimed there was a connection to a rundown property out of town, backing onto the marshlands. As my two partners and I approached, the pervasive silence enveloping the property was almost peaceful, until the unmistakable smell in the air signalled that we were dealing with more than just a simple missing persons case. Our knocks on the front door went unanswered, intensifying the eerie feeling that clung to the desolate property. We decided to widen our search to the outside. Florida's swampy terrain, especially the marshy ground in the property's backyard, wasn't foreign to us, but the putrid odour hinted at a gruesome discovery. We didn't have to venture far before unsettling clues began to surface. Items of bloody clothing, boots, and even bone fragments hinted that the area was active and held some macabre secrets. My partner radioed in for backup. Amid the echoing silence of the property, our flashlight beams caught the eyes of gators lurking in the swamp. Wading into the marsh would be a dangerous endeavour, so we backed away to enter the property from the back door. As we made our way inside, a television and games console were left running in one room, a stark contrast to the chaos that engulfed the rest of the house. The remnants of drug use were evident, with needles and tinfoil scattered everywhere. Not a nice environment, although fairly textbook for any trap house we'd seen previously. We cautiously continued to search the property, when without warning, a man materialised from a wardrobe door, brandishing a machete and swinging it at one of my partners. The blade cut deep, leaving a nasty open wound. In the chaos that followed, my other partner managed to shoot the assailant in the shoulder, sending him to the ground in a heap. As medics and forensics arrived on the scene, the wounded suspect was taken into custody. His name was all too familiar to the gang unit, a young man, but a key player in the constant violence that had plagued the city. But the horrors of that house were far from over. In a utility room at the front of the house, we made the grisly discovery of 2 large freezer cabinets. 4 bodies lay within, their heads and hands completely severed, rendering identification impossible. The distinctively human bones we found outside, fragments left for the swamp's gators to devour. The method suddenly became chillingly clear. The investigation that followed stretched on for months, with no closure and few actionable leads from the evidence at the house. While the man we had apprehended began to recover from his gunshot wound, he could only be charged with the assault on the detective. The intricacies of the case, and its ties to gang violence and the missing persons dilemma, still eluded us. In the end, the gang tensions and missing persons cases seemed to simmer down for a while. We may have disrupted the violence on the streets, always temporarily, but the questions of that case and its grisly details still bother me today.